No, no, just wait a minute, though. This is important because you told me just a minute ago when I talked about PGA Tour Series China that wasn't happening, that was gone. But now you're telling me something different. Now you're telling me that, oh, no, we still have the business arrangement. Actually, you're hemming and hawing on that. But you're saying we haven't done any events in China. Well, of course not, because of COVID restrictions. You haven't been allowed to. I'm trying to ascertain whether you still have this 20-year agreement with Chinese entities to do tour events in China.
Senator Hawley is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Price, I just want to come back to the answers that you gave me regarding the PGA Tour in China and make sure that I understand where this rests currently, what the current status is. So let's see if I've got the facts right. In 2018, the PGA Tour announced a 20-year agreement for a new entity called PGA Tour China Series. 20-year agreement. This is what your spokesperson said about it just as recently as last year, 2022. Quote, the PGA Tour established a separate entity based in Beijing, China. Continuing, the PGA Tour Series China is owned and operated by the PGA Tour and supported by the General Administration of Sport of China, that's the Chinese government, and the China Golf Association. Now, you're telling me that this entity no longer exists?
Senator, I would have to get the facts for you on PGA Tour of China. I can give
Well, I thought you said to me just a little bit ago, I thought you said that you did one event in 2019 and it doesn't exist anymore.
From an event standpoint, that series has not operated since 2019.
Because of COVID.
It has not operated because of COVID, and we have no plans to continue that tour.
Because of COVID? Because just as recently as last year, you had events scheduled in China. You had to ultimately cancel them because of COVID, but that doesn't sound to me like you suspended your business arrangement.
I would have to check the status of the contract, Senator, but it's my understanding we have no plans.
No, just wait a minute, though. This is important because you told me just a minute ago when I talked about PGA Tour Series China that wasn't happening, that was gone. But now you're telling me something different. Now you're telling me that, oh, no, we still have the business arrangement. Actually, you're hemming and hawing on that. But you're saying we haven't done any events in China. Well, of course not, because of COVID restrictions. You haven't been allowed to. I'm trying to ascertain whether you still have this 20-year agreement with Chinese entities to do tour events in China. You had PGA Tour officials living in China in order to facilitate this. Do you see what I'm driving at? So my question is, does PGA Tour China, this entity that the tour owns based in Beijing, for which you've signed a 20-year contract, does it still exist?
I can tell you two things. One is I would have to check the status of the contract. I do not believe it's currently in force, but I would have to check that, and we'll be happy to get you information on that. The second thing I can tell you is that we haven't operated since 2019, and it's my understanding that we have no plans to continue that series.
As long as COVID exists, or
Period.
And why is that?
From a business standpoint, we're not going to continue that series in China.
Okay. I think you can see what my concerns are, but just so that I'm absolutely crystal clear about it, here's my concern.
Yes, sir.
My concern is that the communist government in China has systematically attempted to use and influence American sports organizations and lots of other entities, our media, entertainment industry, companies, lots of them. They're not shy about using leverage. And we've used the term sports washing a lot today, and I think it's applicable on this situation. And Senator Blumenthal referenced earlier the brutal crackdown in Hong Kong, which I guess I'll call it the privilege. Maybe it's the misfortune of seeing for myself firsthand on the streets there. And while that was going on, what was China doing? What was Beijing doing? They were applying maximal pressure on the NBA that had a lot of contracts very lucrative with China. The chairman mentioned Daryl Morey, at the time general manager of the Houston Rockets, who ventured the most, frankly, anodyne statement in support of the people of Hong Kong. I mean, it was the most moderate little, I think it was a tweet. For this, he was blasted by NBA players, certainly by China, by owners, by his own owner. Ultimately, he resigned. So it worries me when I see the PGA doing business with the Chinese government subjecting its players and this association that you've lauded so much today to those same pressures from a government that is brutal, that is repressive, and that is attempting to use American institutions as a megaphone for their own totalitarian, dystopian, and frankly evil policies. When you imprison millions of people in concentration camps for the purpose of eradicating their religious beliefs and killing them, and that's what they're doing with the Uyghurs, you're an evil regime. When you treat your own people as slaves, and that's what they're doing, you are an evil regime. I don't want to see American institutions co-opted by that regime. That's where I'm coming from with this. I would hope we'd share that perspective. So I look forward to your responses in writing as to the status of your business agreement. I continue to be interested as to why on your Form 990 in both 2018 when this deal was announced and in 2020 after your event, this wasn't disclosed. I'd like to know why that is. And I'd like your assurances that your commitment that you're not going to restart this series in China and you're not going to conduct business operations with millions of dollars in financing from Chinese entities. Will you give me that commitment?
Senator, I'd be happy to give you the information on the status of our contract in China, and I'll certainly follow up with you with regard to the disclosures in the 990. You know, as I've stated, we have no intentions of continuing that series from my perspective, and I can't commit the tour for the long term. I'm not in a position to do that. But there's nothing in the short term or immediate future that, from a tournament standpoint, that we're considering doing in China.
I would just say finally, Mr. Chairman, that I think that the era in which institutions, sports leagues, businesses, when they say it with regard to communist China that, well, we leave the politics to other people, we just don't take any position on issues, I think that time has passed. When you have a government that is as oppressive and imperial as that government is, and is doing to its people what that government is, and has designs to do to others around the world what that government wants to do, I think it's time for American companies, American institutions to stand up and be counted. And I hope that the PGA will. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks, Senator Hawley. Senator Paul.
I've been a vocal critic of the Saudis for years and led the effort to block billions in arms sales to Saudi Arabia. The Saudis have demonstrated a relentless pattern of malign behavior ranging from the brutal killing and dismemberment of Jamal Khashoggi within their consulate, for which they evaded punishment, and their consistent disregard for human rights is well known. Additionally, they have committed war crimes in Yemen, a war for which American taxpayers are being used as unwitting accomplices, resulting in thousands of civilian casualties from their ruthless actions. Nevertheless, I see no constitutional power that suggests Congress should involve itself in Gulf. I have no doubt that some will argue that the tax code or somewhere in the ever-expansive Commerce Clause is the power to regulate private agreements. I disagree. As an originalist interpretation of the Constitution would lead to a different conclusion. If we took the Ninth Amendment seriously, if we took the principles of liberty, of contract seriously, we would acknowledge that the Constitution affords protection for such agreements. We have no business asking the PGA about their negotiations or what they might do or what they might do. It's not the business of government. If members of the Senate wanted to express their outrage over Saudi Arabia in a meaningful way, I gave them an opportunity to do so. In December 2021, I proposed canceling $650 million sale of 280 advanced air-to-air missiles and 596 missile launchers to Saudi Arabia, but there was no congressional hearing. We're here today talking about golf, but we didn't have one congressional hearing over sending hundreds of millions of dollars of advanced weapons to Saudi Arabia. There was no expression of outrage. Instead, 67 senators voted against my proposal and voted to continue selling arms to Saudi Arabia. It's time that Congress rediscovers the presumption of liberty, that our first recourse is to defend the unenumerated rights of private actors, not to expand our few and defined powers to regulate anything we may personally dislike. As a member of this institution, I find no grounds for government to be involved in the game of golf. But are there legitimate questions? Could we have legitimate hearings? Are there things we should be discussing? Of course. Do the 9/11 victims have a legal obligation owed to them by the Saudi Arabian government? It's a real question. Should we be involved with selling arms to Saudi Arabia? A real question. Should be debated, and we should have votes on these things. Should we be involved in the war in Yemen? Nobody in Congress ever voted to go in war in Yemen. Why the hell are we involved in that war? Furthermore, with regard to sports, there is a valid discussion that should be going on, and we should have a discussion of, and that's the antitrust involvement in sports. I think like most antitrust, it's topsy-turvy. It's flipped upside down. It's doing the wrong thing. PGA mentioned they have some rules. You join the PGA, you got to obey some rules to be part of the PGA. If you don't obey those rules, they should have the right to exclude you. That's what associations are about. If you don't allow them to have rules. The court has totally screwed this up, and Congress has let them. The court ruled unanimously that the NCAA can't invoke their rules. And so they've completely screwed up college athletes. We used to be proud. Many of us loved watching amateur athletes that weren't paid. Now everybody that plays basketball in college is going to be driving a Bentley or a Rolls. I mean, we're going to be seeing rap stars instead of basketball stars. I mean, this is crazy. But you know why it happened? Because Congress sat around and said, oh, well, because of antitrust, we can't let the NCAA do it. It went to the court, and the court made the ruling, unfortunately, a unanimous ruling based on the law. So the law's got to change. Antitrust shouldn't be involved with associations, shouldn't be involved with the PGA, shouldn't be involved with the NCAA. For the most part, antitrust in our country actually does the opposite of what it is intended to do. I'll give you another example. As a physician, if 5 physicians get together and say, we don't like Blue Cross paying us $80 and we want to get $100 an exam from Blue Cross or from United or from Humana, from some billion-dollar company, do you know what antitrust does? Antitrust sues 5 doctors and says you can't talk about this. It's ridiculous. Antitrust is actually protecting the big people versus the small people. But it's a unique situation to talk about associations, particularly sports associations. Antitrust should let sports associations. You don't have to join PGA. You don't have to join a sports association. You can be outside the NCAA, but the only way they had power was because they had the power of a large body and there was prestige in being part of the NCAA. All of that's gone. It's the wild, wild west, and nobody knows what's going to happen with college sports, but nobody's really happy about it. You know, there always are professional sports, and as someone who grew up in a sport that wasn't one where you were well remunerated, I understand the idea of trying to allow some contracts. There were some in-betweens on these things. You know, for swimmers don't really have professional sports. But at the same time, there was a way to probably do this that could have been done through the NCAA, but the courts gutted the NCAA and Congress sat by and watched this. So there are legitimate concerns that we could look into as Congress, but I don't think it's a legitimate concern to berate private individuals over contracts, to get involved and say, well, what are you going to do? Will you promise me the contract won't do this? That's not the role of government to tell people, oh, you can't make a contract doing this. No, in a free country, you make contracts. They're the business of the people making contracts, and government shouldn't be involved in this at all. So I see a certain illegitimacy to the whole proceeding today. Valid questions about Saudi Arabia that should be addressed, but we're not addressing the valid things because we have a show trial basically of a private organization, which I think is inappropriate.
Thank you, Ranking Member Paul. I'm going to take the prerogative of the chair to address at least the legal issue that you've raised, the constitutional question. Congress's authority to investigate here and investigate golf comes from Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution, which gives us the power to lay and collect taxes and to regulate and therefore investigate interstate commerce. I don't need to tell anyone in this room, golf is a $100 billion industry. Mr. Dunn himself has referred to the billions of dollars, 3.6 billion, I believe, that the PGA Tour has provided to charity. In my own state, the Travelers Championship brings $60 million to my state annually and millions of dollars to local charities. The PGA Tour has a major impact on our economy, our way of life, our image in this country, our self-image and our image abroad. The PGA Tour also derives tremendous benefits from tax laws established by Congress because it operates as a 501c6, not-for-profit entity, and that provision of law has received little scrutiny. This inquiry may lead to close scrutiny of 501c6. A study conducted in 2013 found that this benefit was worth at least $200 million to the tour between 1993 and 2013. Congress has a long history of conducting oversight on matters related to sports. I participated in a number of them involving the NCAA, domestic violence in the NFL, doping in Major League Baseball, sexual assault in women's gymnastics, and anti-competitive practices in multiple sports. But most importantly, as I said in my opening remarks, this hearing and our investigation is ultimately not about golf. We're here because we're concerned about the PGA Tour's deal in terms of what it means for an authoritarian government to use its wealth to capture American institutions, because we are an open society. And I've joined Senator Paul in many of his amendments, advocacy, and so forth involving the Saudi government, and I appreciate much of what he has said about it. But I do think that there is not only a legitimate role here, an imperative role for this committee and the United States Congress. Senator Scott?
Point of inquiry? Point of inquiry?
Yes, sir.
Nothing in Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution allows Congress to intervene or involve itself in private contractual negotiations.
Well, if that's an inquiry, the answer is nothing explicitly authorizes intervention. But as you well know, antitrust law, consumer protection law, many other laws involve protection of public interests and individual interests because the public interest demands it. Senator Scott.
Sure. I didn't get to participate in the whole hearing. I have to go to another hearing. But first off, thank you for being here. You're a great Florida company. As you know, golf is really important to our economy. I can't imagine doing what you're doing, trying to negotiate a deal when you have cameras in front of you. My prior life was negotiating deals and doing deals, and you'll never get it. It's very difficult to get a deal done that way. So I think that's pretty frustrating for you guys. But could you talk about, just take a state like Florida or any other, you can pick any other state, the importance of what golf is doing from a charity standpoint, from a building a global brand standpoint, and how important what golf has become to this country?
Senator Scott, I'll be happy to speak to that, and I'm happy to tell you that in addition to the PGA Tour being headquartered in Florida and our flagship Tournament Players Club, TPC Sawgrass, being there, we conduct 10 tournaments in your state. Those tournaments generate over $30 million for charity annually. Cumulatively, our tournaments in the state of Florida have generated over $800 million for charity, and our annual economic impact in Florida is over $800 million. And importantly, those are the type of things that we're trying to protect, our ability to do that. If we can move from the framework agreement to the definitive agreement, in which the PGA Tour has absolute control, we'll be able to continue to do that, and we'll be able to expand our economic impact in Florida and across the nation. We're in 34 states now. We have an economic impact of over $4 billion. We think we can grow that significantly if we can reach the definitive agreement.
Yes, thank you, Senator Scott. And, I think golf is a force of good. I think if people get to know each other and play golf, I think it will solve a lot of problems. And I think to the degree that golf is a global game, it's incumbent on all of us to try to reach out and try to avoid things. And maybe there's a possibility of meeting people with different faiths, different religions, different colors, that we can get to know better, and maybe we can have a better world. That's how I look at it.
All right. Thank you. Thanks for being here. Good luck.
Senator Hawley.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thanks to the witnesses for being here. I think I heard you testify to the chairman just a little bit ago that you may take $1 billion or more from the Saudis. Let's talk about some of the money that you've taken from communist China. Speaking of sports washing, what can you tell me, Mr. Price, about the PGA Tour China Series?
The PGA, thank you, Senator. The PGA Tour China Series was last operated in 2019. We have not operated it since then and have no plans to continue that series.
You don't have a PGA Tour in China at all right now?
We do not.
What about the PGA China Tour? Let's look at the quote here from Mr. Greg Gilligan. PGA Tour China is truly thrilled to be partnering with Shanghai Sports on the PGA Tour Series China. Shanghai is a world-class organization with great experience of connecting the expectations of international sports bodies with an understanding of the Chinese market. This isn't happening?
I'm not sure, Senator, what the date on that quote is, but we have not conducted the PGA Tour China Series since 2019.
But you just signed a 20-year agreement to conduct a tour series in China, correct?
It has not been conducted since 2019.
Did you take $45 million in financing from the Yao Group to conduct PGA Tour China?
No, sir, we did not.
PGA, your spokesperson said, this is Laura Livesey, PGA Tour China is owned and operated by the PGA Tour and supported by the General Administration of Sports of China and the China Golf Association. So you're saying this doesn't exist anymore? When was it shut down?
It hasn't operated since 2019.
Did you return the money?
So we were not paid $45 million. I don't recall the specific details of the agreement. We received a sanction fee, as I recall, for the series of events, and there was an operator within China that actually operated the events.
So you're saying you don't know anything about this?
No, sir, I didn't say that. I just said it hasn't been operated since 2019, and I don't recall the specifics of the agreement, but I can certainly get those to you.
Well, I know the specifics of the agreement. Chinese private equity firm Yao Capital financed the PGA Tour Shanghai deal with $45 million investment. The Yao Capital firm has direct ties to the Chinese Communist Party. Does that concern you? Concerns me.
And Senator, we're not operating there anymore, and I believe I can get the details. That money went directly to an operator in China, not the PGA Tour.
It was a deal between the PGA Tour and a Chinese company to do a series of events. You at least admit those events happened just a few years ago, right?
They did happen for a series of years.
Okay, so you're telling me that you're not going to do any further business in China, you've got no contracts with any Chinese entities, and you're not going to operate PGA events in China?
We have no plans to continue that series at this point in time.
And you're not going to operate any other series? You're not going to do anything in China? Do I understand you correctly?
We have no present plans to do that.
Has the PGA, given your past business relationships with Chinese entities, have you taken a stance on the Uyghur concentration camps? Have you condemned the genocide there?
We do, Senator, we firmly support human rights. And we're very concerned about what's happened there, but we leave those type matters to our U.S. government, but we certainly do not condone that type activity.
Well, wait a minute. When you say you leave the matters to the United States government, I'm just asking you: will you speak out against the persecution and internment of Uyghurs in China? You've done business in China. You've conducted tour events in China. You've accepted money from Chinese entities in some form of a partnership. Do you condemn the concentration camps that currently, as we sit here and speak, are imprisoning Uyghurs, religious minorities, in that nation?
Senator, we certainly do not condone or support that type of activity. Yes, sir.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit about your lobbying activity as it relates to the Saudi deal. Public reports say that you paid lobbyists last year in just one quarter of the year, 6 figures or more as to lobby Congress on the Saudi Golf League proposals. What was that related to?
Senator, we went to members of Congress as we faced a very threat to our existence to make them aware of what the Public Investment Fund was attempting to do through its operations of the Live Golf Series.
And so make Congress aware and ask for what? What did you want this body to do?
Senator, anything that the Congress could do within its power to help preserve an American institution.
But this is before you agreed to take $1 billion from the same people that you were lobbying against a year ago.
Senator, we faced a choice. One was to allow professional golf to be taken over and operated by the Public Investment Fund of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. The second was to allow the PGA Tour to continue to lead it in accordance with our mission and our values for the benefit of our players and charity.
Let me come back to, if I could, this issue with the PGA Tour of China series. Why didn't you disclose your activities and your partnership with Yao Capital and the Shanghai Group? Why didn't you disclose that on your Form 990? You're a tax-exempt organization, is that right? I think you testified to that effect.
501c6 tax-exempt organization.
Okay, so you have to
Yes,
file
sir.
a Form 990, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
The Form 990 contains a Schedule F, is that correct?
Yes.
The Schedule F requires you to disclose any activities conducted overseas, including unrelated trade or business programs, services, fundraising activities, investments, or maintaining offices, employees, or agents for the purpose of conducting any such activities. Your Form 990s didn't disclose anything related to your dealings in China. Why not?
Senators, our intention is to fully comply with all the disclosure requirements on Form 990. If there's a disclosure requirement that we should have made that we didn't, we will get that corrected.
Were you attempting to paper over what you had done in China and your partnership with these Chinese entities?
Absolutely not, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.